Now we have a keynote presentation by Shamarukh Mohiuddin, Director, Cadmus Group and Founder, the Bangladesh Project, Washington, D.C. She will present a keynote on how can business drive inclusive growth in the new Bangladesh. Please welcome.
Thank you. Really glad to be here. Thanks to Daira for inviting me. I'm sandwiched between two really interesting panels, one on comparisons across South Asia and one on South Asia cohesion. So I'm shifting gears a little bit on business issues because I do think that these issues are really important. So I believe my presentation is just coming up. Just give me a moment. Thank you. So today I'll touch on a few things. Mostly how businesses in Bangladesh can be more responsible and ethical players in society, because I know that one of the most striking things in recent months have been the numbers that we've been seeing in terms of the sheer scale of wealth and capital being stolen and taken out of the country by political and business elites. So we were just talking about political governance, but I think business governance is just as important. So as you know, there have been massive loan defaults where money was stolen, siphoned via shell firms, as well as cross-border money laundering. And we're still chasing after many of these assets, and in some cases, it may be also too late. My next slide, I wanted to just put in context some of the numbers that we've seen. So according to some estimates, you've seen the Financial Times report that $17 billion was stolen by just one group, the Asylum Group. And this is roughly 4% of Bangladesh's GDP. So 4% of GDP just by one company. And then, of course, other leaders of companies like Simco and others have been named for allegedly embezzling millions of dollars. And the amount that was stolen by government players is astronomical. So these are resources that, of course, could have been invested at home in Bangladesh to generate employment, stimulate enterprise, strengthen our economic foundations. So I want to just throw out a quiz to the audience. How many manager jobs do you think could have been supported for exactly that amount of $17 billion that was stolen by Asylum Group in 1 year? So a rough guess. Any guesses? In the millions or thousands? So it's actually 20 million jobs, manager jobs. So I think that just beyond the numbers, we need to think about the impact of all of this money that has left our country and what we need to do also to, as we move forward, to put in place corporate governance mechanisms. So there is the issue of enforcement, which I know that on paper we have a number of laws, but enforcement still remains a challenge. But in certain areas, there are not laws on paper either. So I'll be focusing a little bit more on that, as well as how can business drive inclusive growth? So beyond enforcement, how can business be proactive leaders in supporting inclusive growth in Bangladesh? That's a subject that I spend a lot of time on in the US, advising corporations on how to be more constructive and better players in society. The other larger question is, what is it that's missing in our society that makes businesses so extractive as well as politicians so extractive? And how can we change the norms and structures and incentives to change all these things so that all of these players feel more invested in the welfare of the country? So here, I'll draw the example of this network of merchants across North Africa in the 11th century, mainly around the Mediterranean, called the Maghreb traders. They operated a long distance across the region, and there were no state enforcement of contracts, and there were no courts, and rule of law was almost non-existent. But there was a sense of honesty and trust across these traders because there was a reputational risk. So if one trader cheated, then the rest of the network would boycott him, his customers would boycott him. So reputation became the glue that held the network together. So I think that what we're struggling with now is, in spite of having rule of law to some degree, we have rules on paper, people have not been worried for a long time about reputational risk, and that's slowly starting to change, I think, now with the uprising, because I feel like the public has awakened to wrongdoings, and to some degree this is being taken too far as well with mob rule. We also don't want that as an outcome, but there is sort of a sense of what reputational risk can do to you if you are not if you're not being a trusted player in society. And of course, now with the discussions around the other players, media accountability and the role of the state, I think that hopefully we can get there where we can rebuild that trust. So I feel like the trust deficit is a really big problem for Bangladesh. And I think that there is no real measurement of trust of different institutions. So I would like to propose that we do a trust barometer, which some countries have done, to ensure that there is public trust in business and government and media. And it will be a survey that creates a trust index, basically, that will gather data with interviews, measuring whether there's public confidence in government, in media, in business, and if not, then what are the gaps? So if we don't measure, we don't move forward. So I think that this is really important as a consideration as we move forward. So what are the impacts of this extractive business behavior that we've seen? So we talk about it quite a bit, but in real terms, what it really ends up being is lower per capita growth as a result of corruption, weaker investment, lower human capital. And according to some of the studies that were done in this field, this data from Uganda, for example, shows that for every 1 point increase in the bribe rate, there was a 3-point drop in annual firm growth. So this is actually bigger than the impact of taxes on companies. The bribe rate is actually impacting the bottom line of the company even more. So I think that these messages need to get across in terms of the impact overall on the economy. And then state capture also, we still have a system where powerful firms are shaping the rules of enforcement, policies skewed towards narrow interests, and productivity is suffering. So I think we need to kind of understand the impact of all of these on the overall economic growth issues rather than just not seeing the corruption issues in context of all of this. So these are some areas I think we all know where we're still struggling in terms of business governance, rule of law, and the strength of institutions. We're still working on really the larger picture things. There are a number of corporate governance issues that are more micro, but overall there are lack of transparency in procurement systems. E-procurement is still not a thing, and oligarchs are still able to decide who does business with them. There is a lack of corporate law enforcement. We need effective company registries, ownership transparency systems, and stronger bankruptcy laws. Business integrity frameworks, corporate governance reforms are really important. I advise different boards in the US, and the issues of codes of conduct and board independence and audit committees are taken very seriously. And I feel like in Bangladesh, we're still working on finding a way to have independent board members and audit committees. We're still stuck with a lot of companies having families on their boards, deciding on the direction of the company. And as a result, you have a system where all of these issues exist in corruption, where things are not caught ahead of time or people have vested interest in these practices. So just to go back, other corporate governance areas that really need attention are open data. We need to be able to access data directly on government contracts that corporations have. We need to have whistleblower protection and public reporting requirements for companies. And of course, civil society and media are really important parts of this, and there's been more and more reporting about business and governance issues. Citizen engagement, obviously naming and shaming bad behavior, and also NGOs that can be watchdogs for companies. And last but not least, international cooperation. We need stronger cross-border enforcement of anti-bribery conventions and asset recovery mechanisms like the Stolen Asset Recovery Initiative. And of course, private sector pressure. So foreign investors and lenders should be the ones really pushing companies to have corruption-free practices and better standards in supply chains. So moving on from enforcement, I want to spend a little bit of time discussing what we can do to encourage business to be better players in society. We've seen this proliferation of CSR or corporate responsibility programs by even some of the companies I named earlier, which you've seen in the news as having been some of the worst players in terms of embezzlement and money laundering. But a number of these companies had very strong CSR programs, corporate responsibility programs. You saw full-page ads on NGOs that they're working with, social causes that they're giving to. So I'll argue that this is really not about just doing corporate responsibility by donations and charity. We still need to have a culture in Bangladesh where businesses see that doing good is actually good for profits. Investing in employees, investing in consumers, investing in the community is actually going to improve their bottom line. So I'm still yet to see many business schools here focus on that very much in terms of the shared value idea and how you can do well by doing good and really investing in the society that you live in. So we need to think about business in terms of inclusive growth. So first on employees, companies can actually make higher profits by investing in their employees. And one quick example from a company that I've worked with, Levi's, which makes jeans, as you know. For every $1 that they spend on supporting workers in their supply chain through workforce training and increased wages, it actually leads to a $3 increase in revenue due to increases in productivity and worker retention. So workers are more happier when they're getting trained and increased wages and more productive. So they're actually seeing a higher return for investing in their workers. Second, on consumers, we've seen some examples of international companies in the finance space. They're trying to bring marginalized potential customers into the banking system by helping them access finance. So this is, of course, good for business because they're targeting new consumers, but a lot of these people have been previously unbanked. So there's a big social purpose in terms of bringing more people that don't have access to financial services into their customer base. So we need to see these areas where these initiatives overlap in terms of the profit motive as well as the social purpose. Microsoft is doing the same in terms of disability access to their technologies, which makes them also have brand recognition as an inclusive technology company. And thirdly, on community, companies like Unilever and Walmart, for example, have committed billions of dollars to source from diverse and women-owned businesses, as well as minority-owned businesses. They're sourcing these products to sell at their stores, and there are certain mechanisms to make that happen for companies by imposing laws that you have to source a certain percentage from minority businesses or women-owned businesses, thereby stimulating inclusive growth. But these companies are seeing a real profit imperative as they're doing this because it's turning out to be good for their business. So Walmart, for example, has been sourcing from women-owned businesses in their supply chain for the last 10 years, and they're saying that women business owners who are supplying to the Walmart stores, they understand the customers better, they understand the market better, they're ultimately half the population, and women are making the household buying decisions, right? So it's quite unwise actually not to source from women business owners, but many companies are not doing that. I happened to talk to a number of Bangladeshi businesses on one of my previous trips here where there's no data even on the types of business owners that they're sourcing from. So I think that there is a strong imperative in terms of being more inclusive in sourcing. Only 1% of corporate procurement actually goes to women, which is really deplorable. So I think that basically the message is let's focus on enforcement, which I've spoken about, but also think about ways to incentivize business and figure out ways that business can see their role in society as a positive player and supporting inclusive growth, and not just doing fluffy corporate responsibility programs, but looking really holistically at consumers and employees and the community that they're working with. So I'll end there, and I know that we're shifting gears to talk about examples across South Asia around cohesion, so I hope that the issues of business will come up in some way around that as well. Thanks very much.